This is the TJ Hoisington Podcast. Unleash your greatness within.
Hi there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. It was my privilege to interview Ashley Hurd.
You already know. My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com. Oh, if you dreaming it, believe in it, work hard for it, and in the process serve others in a positive way. Think you can do it.
Yes, you see, Ashley is the author of this new book titled The Manager Method, a practical framework to lead, support, and get results. And that's what this book provides. But it's also what we discuss in this interview that you're about to listen to. And I tell you what, it was a great interview. Ashley is great. So let me just give you a quick couple points on her background, and then we'll jump right into the interview. How's that? All right. Ashley Hurd is a former chief people officer and general counsel, leadership speaker, and podcast host who has trained over 250,000 managers through LinkedIn Learning and live corporate trainings. Ashley built the Manager Method after leading HR and legal teams at McKinsey, Yum Brands, and Modern Luxury. She's a top LinkedIn Learning instructor and co-host of the HR Besties podcast, where she is a top 10 business podcast host. I tell you what, it was great to have Ashley on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the interview. Ashley, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, TJ.
We're grateful to have you here as well. So one of the things I like to do is ask my guests to share a little bit of your backstory or biography a little bit and give us a little bit of a flavor of who you are, what your past is like a little bit, and so forth. So if you could help us with that, that'd be great.
Sure. I'd say my unique career quilt, I like to put it, for those that have had a career that maybe your relatives at Thanksgiving have a lot different description for it, but you think, I've been trying to figure myself out and go different paths. I've worked every level of the corporate ladder, I'd say, and some not corporate. I started out as a Subway sandwich artist as my first job, worked in Kmart retail, all of those jobs.
Kmart.
Actually, Kmart. It's harder and harder to find one of those these days. Yeah. It was a pretty fun job back in the day as an electronics associate, but I went to a liberal arts college, and out of college, I worked my first professional corporate job. I worked for a company. Now it was acquired by Gartner eventually, but I did B2B sales, cold calling sales, where I cold called Fortune 1000 CFOs. Mm-hmm. And so I like to say dealing with angry customers at Subway really helped to prepare me for trying to get on the phone some, CFO I'd rather name in Fortune, at least get them not to hang up on me in 3 seconds, maybe give me 20 seconds. And so I took some of that experience, but I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I was the first lawyer in my family, so no, family history. It wasn't in my blood, but I always wanted to do it. And so I went to law school, became an employment lawyer. So I worked generally for companies, doing a lot of litigation all over the U.S. in court about seeing where things can go wrong and how expensive and painful it is to clean up those messes. I went in-house. So I worked directly for companies from media company to Yum Brands, KFC. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky originally. So that was, if there's a dream job for someone from Louisville, that's it. Okay. And then in McKinsey consulting firm. And it was when I was at McKinsey, because as I was a lawyer, I'd taken on strategic HR as well. So not always a combo you see, but at McKinsey, I'd been a lawyer and assistant general counsel. I ended up getting the role as their head of HR North America. Yep. And for a lot of people, especially, I didn't have any Ivy League degrees. It was wild to me to think that I got this job. But I got
you mentioned that in the book. Like this was like your dream job. This was like the big job, right? This is what you shoot for. Yeah.
I say the LinkedIn test. If anybody's ever had a job and you're so excited to announce it on LinkedIn or tell people like, I got this job, but then the actual doing of the job isn't quite as exciting. Or at that point in time, I realized, all I did was work. There were a lot of super smart people I worked with, but what I saw was that It was the people I'd worked with at Subway, at Kmart, even as a lawyer supporting KFC. They were restaurant managers and people that had incredible business skills. They could drive business results and also had a huge impact on their team's lives outside of work. And they would have thought what they did was, nothing compared to what some fancy senior partner did. But for me, I really had this idea of taking all of my experiences together and creating a platform to help managers have really practical tips so that a aspiring manager at a coffee shop could have exactly some of the same lessons that they don't realize that a CEO of a Fortune 10 company can use often the same advice and goes through the same challenges that they do.
Oh, I love that. And I love that story in your introduction of your book, right? The manager method.
That is it. You have a copy before I do.
Are you serious?
I haven't got my physical copy as I say this now. And when this comes out, luckily it's out or about to be out. But no, I think my physical copy is supposed to arrive today. So I'm excited.
I feel special then. Well, I tell you, I read your book. It's fantastic. It's got real life stories within it. You give great examples, but it did draw my attention that I made a note in the introduction. You talk about how this quilt, and you talk about how you bounced around and you saw great managers, for example, at KFC, and it was often, you didn't see that sometimes at the higher levels in some of the corporate America corporate America jobs you've had. So my question is, there came a point when you were at McKinsey, quote, it was getting that so-called dream job that made me realize it wasn't my dream. So you got to this place where you're like, I got there. I got it. Boom. And then you realized over a period of time, what made that change? Give me a little bit of that story. What was going on there?
Well, on one hand, so when I was at McKinsey, when I joined McKinsey, we'd actually just moved back from living abroad. Just before that, my husband and our two kids, we'd lived in Sydney, Australia for 2 years for his job. I worked remotely for a U.S. company. When I was coming back, a friend who hadn't realized I was coming back for my same job had said, oh, there's this opening at McKinsey and they're looking for a lawyer in Atlanta. I thought, okay, well, I applied to that. So literally we left Sydney on a Sunday, went to Louisville to get all of our stuff because we lived back in Louisville, came to Atlanta. I started work on a Friday. And so it was a very quick turnaround. And so a lot of what I did there, and again, great firm, loved many of the people I worked with, still relationships, but all I did was work. I felt like from the opposite of when we lived in Australia, it reset how I thought about work and life and what matters. We spent so much time as a family, so much time outside. And I came back to the US and all of a sudden I felt like I'd gone right back into this rat cage where I just was on this wheel. I had early morning calls, late night calls, a global organization has very global needs. And I found myself, all I did was work. And still you kind of trudge through. And so I had been asked if I wanted to apply for this HR leadership role, leading all of North America HR for McKinsey. Like, how are you going to say no to that? And going through it and getting the job. Again, I think to myself, like, if you were to ask me, like, am I really enjoying what I'm doing? No, I felt pretty stressed, but I was proud of what I was doing. And you feel like it's what you're supposed to do. And I don't know who sets that expectation, but just in your mind, you think this is the path. And so that's why I love, obviously your podcast, Unleash Your Greatness Within. I had this little flame at that point in time. It was like a teeny little spark, but I'm still very much, even before I wanted to be a lawyer, I really wanted to be a playwright. In high school, Louisville, I did youth performing arts school program. I did it and ended up writing plays, had plays put on at the Louisville Performing Arts Center. And I loved that. And, I moved on with life and I lived a practical life where I did kind of the corporate and all that. But I just had this bug. And so it was a conversation I was having with someone. Sometimes this happens. If you've ever had a conversation, you're doing your job and you talk with colleagues or people outside of work and you say, oh, what would you be doing if you weren't working here? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite topics, which probably is a good sign of why I'm no longer doing that. But this person on my team said, what would you do? And I said, well, I bought this domain, managermethod.com, a couple years ago when we were living in Australia, thinking maybe one day I'll kind of put together my thoughts of writing scripts for people, because that's one thing I've done often is writing scripts for managers to have difficult conversations and things for them to think about and really help them to whatever a difficult conversation is. Maybe that's performance, maybe it's a termination, but even sometimes it's what do I say in a one-on-one meeting or onboarding someone. And I said, I really want to do that one day. There was a woman who'd worked at McKinsey for decades. She said, why wouldn't you do that now? And I said, well, I got this job. I literally just got it. We just had a presentation to the whole firm where I am, and I feel like this is the path I'm supposed to be on. But it was that idea of, what if I didn't? What if I did something different? And my dream is really to help not just senior partners, who are super sharp and many of them incredibly kind, but is to help the people that don't always have access to leadership skills or things I knew as a lawyer, but also as HR. And so to help at scale have those conversations with people in every industry. And so that was where it was really born. And it was a choice. And it helped because a prior company let me come back and worked into my deal that I would support them and I could start my business, and they were totally cool with that.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people, again, as you're just trying to start your own thing, it's nice to have stability behind it. And so that helped make it a softer launch, not just a clean exit.
No, that's great. When you shared that story about that colleague that made that comment, why don't you just do it now or whatever? I remember almost 26 years ago, I was working with Tony Robbins, and I was sitting in his seminar. My wife was with me in a seminar. I was an employee, so we would go to the seminars, and I invited my wife to come with me. She was 6 months pregnant with our second child. We did the fire walk. We did all that. My wife was like, I've never shared this before, but she's like, you think the fire walk is hard? Trying to give birth naturally is hard. I've done that. I'm about to do that a second time, kind of.
Yeah, she's right. She's not wrong. She's not wrong.
Totally.
And you better not have told her she was wrong.
I know. No way. But anyway, I just thought that was funny. But I remember Tony was on stage and he was talking about living your dreams, and everybody has a sense of passion within you, that greatness within kind of thing. This is where it all kind of began for me. And he stood up there and he said, talking about living your dreams, and here I am, an employee working with him. And on stage in front of 5,000 people, he said, when would now be a good time? I remember nudging my wife, and I said, I think I need to turn in my resignation. I've been making excuses, right? And it was shortly after that I ended up leaving the organization. I think that's what's tough for a lot of people, is taking that step and trusting that what comes after that step will turn out okay over time. Any thoughts around any of that?
I think it's so true. And one thing that I think is really important to know is that it will be ups and downs. I mean, I am sure, TJ, you have had ups, but if I'm going to say downs, sometimes the downs come to us much, much more clearly, and we remember those painfully because,
painful. Yep.
I mean, I started Manager Method just over 6 years ago, and I started it. Everything with the North Star was to help managers, again, have difficult conversations or help them work better with employees. It's in everything. And so, along the way, I created products, and then I'd have a course, or an HR organization would say, well, we'd like to buy licenses to that course for our managers, which was great because originally, the first thing I created was, or not the first, but the first big thing I created that still exists today is this course, Manager 101. Again, really tips from I knew as a lawyer in HR, really conversations I've had with managers about, things like, not like here's the ADA or FMLA, here's the definition, the trainings I did give as a junior lawyer that were super boring and not that practical, but what do you do in a moment when your best performer in the middle of a key project says, I'm sick, I have to take time off, I can't work today, or I've had this unexpected thing happen. How do you react, and why does that matter? And so I created this thinking, okay, all these conversations, I'm going to help managers drive performance without driving people out the door. This is my passion. Well, TJ, in a shocking turn of events, managers that actually need manager training aren't going on the internet looking for it unless they're being required to as a condition of their employment. And so, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And all these things of like, how do you market your offer is just language I don't think in. I think in terms of actually helping the people and have the conversations. But so I started putting my tips out on social media and making these videos. And so that's when I had HR leaders that said, oh, we want to bring this to our organization overall. And I thought, oh, well, that makes so much more sense. It should have been common sense, but it wasn't. And so it's the ups and downs and ups and downs that I think it's really important to know that those are there and those are going to be there, because when you go through those, you may think hit your first roadblock. And that's where I think a lot of people stop and say, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back. I'll go back to being an employee. I'll go back to what feels safe. Although now, even being an employee doesn't quite have the safety net that it has in years past. But just flipping that in your head and thinking, okay, how can I get through this? And how can I look back on this time and appreciate what I've gone through? I really try to do that, and it's not easy. But when you go through those low times, I just think it's important to know that's what all the people you think of as success. You look at yourself. You've had this podcast. You've been going at this. You have your business. You have Tony Robbins. I mean, he went through the thick of it. Guarantee you, everyone you think had success had so many struggles along the way. It's the people that choose to keep going. And that's the magic. And that's the part that I think over time really feels good. Doesn't tend to feel good in the moment. Feels a lot of other things than good. But
no, but that's a good reminder. Ian Gray once said the successful people do the things that the unsuccessful people aren't willing to do. And so you're right. Just hanging in and confronting those first set of obstacles with a positive attitude and keep going and adjust where needed to be adjust, but keep going, stay on your purpose, on your passion, and so forth. And eventually, I often say, eventually the magic carpet will appear. But that doesn't mean the magic carpet always stays available to you, right? Because ebbs and flows. Life has peaks and valleys, and you have to retool sometimes. You have to reinvent sometimes, and so on. Anyway, I don't know why we got onto this, but
I love it. I love it. I love it. But I also love. I'll be laughing very much hearing that story of your wife. And I now my kids are almost 12 and 15, and so I'm a bit removed from that. But I do know some people who are pregnant now, and I may have to ask that question: would you rather go through childbirth or walk on fire? And I think the answer can vary based on the day. So I love it.
I'm sure it can. So you women are amazing with all that stuff. So anyway, okay. So one thing that also stood out in the beginning of the book, by the way, I just remind everybody, great book. I've read it and I do love, you have in the subtitle, a practical framework to lead, support, and get results. What I found, it is very practical. By the way, what'd you call it? The Management 101 course that you had? Was that an online course that you provided at the beginning?
Yep, Manager 101. Mm-hmm. Manager 101. Yep.
Manager 101. And that's still available today, I think, right?
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So it just stood out to me that you point out that there's a difference between law firm lawyers and in-house company lawyers. And you didn't have the greatest correct me if I'm wrong here, but you didn't have the greatest experiences, I don't know, emotionally, intellectually, I don't know what it was, at law firm lawyering, if you will. But then you had someone come to you and say, I've got this job, an in-house opportunity. And you said, quote, and you spoke highly of this person that brought you in. You said, quote, my boss clearly communicated what the job would be like and followed up with actions. I love that. That was consistency. It was trust. It probably wasn't trust in the very beginning because you didn't know enough about the company, but over time, his words matched your experience. And I think as a manager, as a leader, trying to be whole and consistent is critical to building the trust that's necessary to create the culture of high performance. Any thoughts around that or that story?
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it was an experience where, and for those that have worked in like kind of two different structures of a function. So maybe you're, sometimes it's a consultant that goes in and then works directly for a company. Sometimes you think that like, oh, I've been doing my own thing. Maybe I should go work directly for someone. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of doing the same thing, but it's a different structure. So for me, it was going from working at a law firm, and I did employment litigation. My cases were all over the country. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed, again, people I worked with, but part of it is being a law firm lawyer is every time you're on a call, people want to end it as quickly as possible because they know they're on the clock.
Yep.
You then have to write to them in this bill what you did in very, detail. I was always thinking about in the terms of billable hours. When I took a vacation, I would think, okay, could I work some hours in? And it just felt so unhealthy. It took over my mind. And so at that time, and I had a toddler, so I felt like I wasn't the most present mom, wife, person for myself. And so it was a general counsel of a publicly traded company. It was $1 billion company at the time. They were my largest client that I worked with, that I supported. And they had said, we're adding somebody to our team. And part of it that I think is really important is he didn't just have great communication. He wasn't telling me, you're going to make 20% more, you're going to do these things. He told me affirmatively, first thing he said was, it is a pay cut. It's a pay cut going from being a law firm lawyer to working in-house, and that's part of it. But part of your compensation is a predictable schedule. So again, while I'd been working or thinking about work 24/7, he said, we work 8 to 5. You will work. I will work 8 to 5.
With an infant, you're like, oh
yeah,
man,
right. Okay, great. He's like, you won't be, at nights on the weekends, they're yours. He's like, we do good work. We care a lot about our work. But you have opportunities to really build your own relationships here and do your own thing. I was joining to become the third lawyer of a $1 billion company, 7,000 employees. And so a lot of my thoughts were, how did we make that happen? So the book, I talk about all the structures we had to make that happen. But it was also him proactively having this conversation, because in law firm role, or there's plenty of other functions, a lawyer role, you hear about what something's like to work somewhere, or you may say, oh, this is an amazing company. And you kind of got to go based on your belief, because when you're applying for a job or interviewing, people rarely will ask the questions that actually make so much of a difference. What's my boss actually like? Okay, I get the HR policy says I get 15 days off, or if you're in another country, I get 4,700 days off. Different, but. Right. But what's it like on my days off? Am I off? Am I off-ish? Am I still expected to dial into things? Am I checking my email? Am I traveling without my laptop? I mean, that's one example, but there's so many, to have a real picture of what that job is like. And it's so important as a leader to choose to proactively give that information to people that want to need it, that are not likely to ask about it. And again, some people, the opposite. I've had other times where especially before I had kids, where I'm like, I want to make as much money as possible. I have law school loans. I thought about billing hours because I wanted to make the bonus. And work-life balance was not my focus. Getting out of debt was. And so, people have all sorts of seasons of life, but recognizing that that's true and asking questions and giving information to make clear what you're able to provide or not is one of the best gifts you can give. And it's communication. It doesn't take additional budget. It doesn't take much additional time. But for me, that was transformational. And I was fortunate to have that. And again, follow through with action. I loved that job.
And I remind the listeners, right? You said it quickly, is be proactive. Ask to get a clear picture of what's expected. Where do certain things begin? Where do they end? And so forth. Many years ago, I started, I don't know where I picked up the belief, but I started to teach it, is that silence isn't silent. In time, if there's something that's important to you, just leaving it in the background of your mind and never putting that forward, eventually you're going to get burnt out, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to take it out on someone, you're going to go home and blame and complain about it, your work, and so forth. It'll come out somewhere. So better to be proactive and ask for those things that are important for you, and hopefully that aligns with the company that you're working with. So just love that.
I think it's a great example. And I think it's that idea of asking and telling people what you want. I don't think that happens enough. I mean, another experience I had when I was working at KFC at Yum Brands is when I was actually looking to potentially leave. It was a culture where it was a great culture, but there were also so many meetings, and I worried because there were multiple people ahead of me, in seniority. And so I didn't really see a path, because my boss wasn't going to be leaving. Right. Multiple people before me. And so I thought, I'll be stuck. Okay, what would I possibly do? And I ended up in a conversation with the president of the company, and he'd said, it's so interesting. I never had any idea that you wanted to move ahead or had interest in anything else, because you never told me. And I thought to myself, well, I'm like a junior lawyer on the team. The last thing I'm going to do is roll over to the president, not even my boss. And so it is a cautionary tale, because if all of a sudden you're jumping and you're not telling your boss you're doing this, and you're going to the CEO and saying, I want to move, you got to read the room a bit. But Correct. For me, it was such a lesson that I've worked to teach others is advocating for yourself literally sometimes means just telling people what you're interested in or asking them for opportunities to learn about what they do. That can help whether you're working within an organization or if you're working with clients. Asking questions is a step that far too few people take advantage of.
Good reminder, right? Don't trust osmosis, right? Ask for what you want, or at least indicate that you want this opportunity, that opportunity, and then grow. I'm thinking then grow the opportunity within the organization. With whatever your company you're working with, maybe there's a problem or a challenge. They put a committee together to help fix that problem. It's above and beyond your job. Why not ask to, as a point, just join that committee to help fix that problem, right? You raise the opportunity to be noticed. You show that you have the self-initiative and so forth. And that's what I think many leaders are looking for. But at some point, communicating it is going to be very important as well. Okay, here's a thing you teach in the book. I think it's really important, is being comfortable with saying, I don't know. All right, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, we as leaders, right, we think we got to know everything and have the answer. And this leads into the manager method process, but speak to I don't know.
I mean, I could respond and just say, you know what? I don't know, TJ, but that might get people stopping listening right there. So I'll try to fill it in.
And then I would respond to you. Let's say that truly happened. Let's say that truly happened, like I stumped you, right, or something, which would not be my goal. But what if I did? Then I'd say, well, what would be your thought about people that say I don't know? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're right. It's as a leader, so often, whether you're becoming an expert, you're listening on this and you're trying to make yourself an expert, or if you're a leader and taking on a title that reflects that, so often we do feel like we have to have all the answers. Yeah. That when people are coming to you, they're asking a question, so I better know. And so to flip that for a bit and think, okay, how many people do you know that truly know it all? And how sometimes can you tell someone, you ask a question and you can tell they are BSing you, like they literally don't know, but they're just trying to make something up to answer it. It's more obvious than you think. And on the flip side, if you ask somebody and they say, you know what, I really don't know. And it's somebody you respect. I guarantee you, Tony Robbins tells people, I don't know sometimes. It may say, I don't know, what do you think? It's kind of the yes and thought, but knowing, giving people opportunity to give their perspective and not being the person that people to look to, because sometimes you're not going to know. And the question is, okay, if I don't know, does that mean they're going to fire me? So if this is a client, they're going to fire me entirely. Or if this is my job, my team's not going to respect me, or this is going to hurt my chances. I mean, people generally don't expect perfection. What they expect is if it's a client asking you a question that you should know, saying in the moment, you know, I don't know right now, in telling them, I want to make sure I get you the right answer, so let me get back to you on that. People are going to respect that. I mean, I'd venture to say, I was going to say 9 times out of 10, I'd say 10 times out of 10, far more than anything else. And it can be a way to then ask a question. If it's something you need to know the answer to, it gives you time to answer. You go and figure it out. But if it's something that person is asking you, like it's a direct report, let's say somebody reports to you, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know either. Just like you said to me, like, what would you think about someone that says, I don't know? It's then asking that person, what were you thinking of doing? And sometimes it helps to know that person's probably thinking, well, you're my boss, you get paid more than me, so that's why I'm asking you. But oftentimes what they're really asking you, in addition to thinking that, is, I have an idea, but I don't want to get embarrassed for proposing it, or I don't want to be fired if things go wrong. I don't want to potentially get in trouble. I mean, that's a real fear people bring into their work, whatever you do. And so saying, you know, I'd love to hear your idea, and saying, I'm here to give you support and give you feedback and talk through it with you, but I'd love for you to go first, just to hear a sense of what you were thinking of doing. And it can change conversations entirely, because people feel like they can give ideas and they're not going to be ashamed. They're going to be able to grow them, but also get that feedback from you so that things go as well as possible. Research shows that people want to be in on things, but it's up to the manager to allow that opportunity to be available to them. And one thing, I agree 100% with you, a manager, a leader can say, if there's an issue going on, they have a question, what's wrong with asking them, hey, what are your thoughts on that? We were doing our leadership academy for a transportation company, and they were doing some construction on a big bridge that would impact the time people could come into work. So the manager, when I was on a coaching call individually with the manager of this group,
And I knew he was a strong-willed, get it done, my idea wins, that kind of person. I said, what are your thoughts? I said, well, I'm just thinking about we come in at 10 instead of 8 and we leave for 2 hours later, whatever. And I said, here's a thought. Have you ever considered going into your next management meeting, because you do that every day with your people to talk about safety and other different things that are important? Why don't you pose it to your team? And he says, okay, I'll do it for you, TJ, and we'll see how it goes. Well, 30 days later, my next coaching call with him, he said, you know what? I did it. I proposed it. I didn't propose it. I asked what they wanted to do. And guess what they all said? They all said, we want to come in at 10 and leave 2 hours later. I said, see? And then he goes, okay, I agree with that. I said, think about the trust that built, or the authenticity, the vulnerability that actually gave strength to the culture of the team, rather than making it solely about your decision. And it just empowered them. So I think it's really important for people to be okay saying, I don't know momentarily, but I'll get the answer. I'll figure it out and I'll get back to you. Right.
And I think it's such a great example, because that aspect of like, when do we show up? When do we start work? How does that impact the team doing the work? How might that impact the people? This is very relevant to me because there's a lot of road work being done. That's a year-long project right down the street from my house. Right. And so I see these road crews constantly. And I've noticed there's a massive difference at times between, when you're sitting there and there's the start and stop sign that switches back and forth. And sometimes you're thinking to yourself, I've been sitting here for 8.5 minutes. Like, when's this, you have all those things built up that unfortunately the public has, and the team doing the work can have. But recently someone stopped and they came up to the windows and were telling people, they're like, we have to have this this is longer. You can't see it, but we have to have this, slow piece of construction. That's why the sign's going to be turned a little longer. We totally appreciate it. And they just gave and needed information, rather than everyone that's sitting there is assuming, oh, this crew's out to get me. They don't want me to get to my coffee appointment or my doctor's appointment. They stopped and had the information, and it changes so much. And so when you do things like that, was such a great example, TJ, because people make decisions all the time, no matter what you're doing. But the more and more you get experience in your career and leadership, you're making decisions constantly. And they're coming to TJ, who's leadership expert. Well, what time do you think we should start this? You are not a road construction expert, unless I missed that on your bio. But they're asking you because they're trying to, just like I mentioned, people are trying to make the right decision. And so he's asking you because it feels like a safe environment, because he knows you're going to give feedback. You're not going to judge. You have the time to talk through it. But exactly the great point. How many times, if you're making a decision, you loop in, whether you have your whole team, that team, whether it's a one-on-one, but think about asking someone to make a decision, because sometimes you'll get input from them you never would have thought of. But no matter what it is, you are translating or transmitting communication, trust, openness. You're making that person proud. So then all of a sudden the schedule comes out. They feel like, well, I had a hand in this. I had a stake in it. And so I totally agree with you said. Research backs it up. People want that level of involvement, and it just shows a team atmosphere, not just the leader telling me what's going to happen.
Critical point. Hope everybody gets that. I think that's really important. You did say about this, leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about navigating uncertainty with confidence and making thoughtful, informed decisions in the moment. I think that one sentence is very clear, right? Very well said, I think. So that takes us into the manager method. So chapter number 2 is all about this method that you came up with. Could you give us sort of an overview of that method?
Sure. So I know when you read a book, you take away, you may read the whole book, and then the next day or 6 months or longer, you ask people what they remember. Often it's a few things. And so trying to make it as memorable as possible and as easy as possible. So I have a 3-step framework. It's called pause, consider, act. So 3 steps, all 3 of them to be done. But the first is the one that I think is most important, because it's the one I see skipped the most often. And that is to literally take a pause. So often as we're making decisions, we're doing things, as mentioned, people feel like they need to be the expert. So they just move right ahead, talk ahead, that you are trying to be commanding and decisive. And action's important. It's needed. But if you pause, whether it's just taking a beat or sometimes it's taking longer than that to think through things, That's something that we don't do enough when we feel like we just need to move ahead. So that's one step, is just to have that pause. And when you do it, use it to consider. So consider, thinking about the person on the other side of it. Like if it's a situation with an employee, for example, you're a leader, you may bring a lot of emotion into that conversation. And if it's a new employee, you may think, okay, I'm going to have to handhold them all entirely. Or if it's your favorite employee, you may think, oh, they made a mistake, but they're never like this. So I'm just, it's excusable. If it's your least favorite employee, they do the exact same thing. Oh, this is it. This is it. This is what we're going to take to get them out the door. But in that situation, if you consider, what would you want to have happen if you were in that situation? It's an element of fairness. Or aside from yourself, think about a loved one. I use the example, my grandmother, whose pictures is on my desk back there. Gigi, she lived a wonderful life to 96 years old.
Ooh,
I would think
nice.
sometimes in management, amazing life. Drove until the very end.
Really?
Drove well. Yeah.
Oh,
volunteered.
that's awesome.
Volunteered. Just totally packed a punch.
Oh.
But that being said, I'm sure that if Gigi were my team member, she may have made mistakes sometimes. And so also thinking, rather than coming in with all of that emotion that can happen when, you want things to go perfectly, you love things to go perfectly, and they don't, and you're so frustrated and you take it out on this person, or you come in really hot. I wouldn't want someone to come into me like that. If I make a mistake, again, I likely feel embarrassed.
Not everybody will, but I would.
Right. I'd want someone to stop, at least have a conversation. Sometimes my answer is going to be, I totally messed up and I'm sorry. And I have nothing more to say than I forgot or I didn't do my part. But also, how would I want Gigi to be treated? Again, I'd want her to have a conversation, but also to get some of that grace. And so just having that human lens, again, sometimes you're going to have difficult conversations, but they can be easier if you bring that consideration of, okay, how would I want to have that? Oftentimes it is pausing to ask questions rather than coming in with assumptions. But the third,
I think that's huge. Don't fly past that too fast.
I won't.
That is awesome. Yeah. So be curious, ask questions, do the find out naturally and authentically. I think that's huge, right? When you ask questions and get their thoughts before you respond is huge.
I saw this step I saw very often as a lawyer. So things would come to me as a lawyer, like employment lawyer. Let's say it was a claim and someone says, I was fired for performance. And the person says, we're at will. We can do whatever we want. I said, well, at will does not mean you can do whatever you want. There's still limitations to it by federal law, local law, whatever that applies. And I didn't love having all the legal conversations, but I'd say, you can't, that doesn't mean you can fire someone because they're pregnant, or you can't treat someone differently. And so there's things to consider that I'm like, this is no fun when we're having this conversation. But what I'd often say is, okay, what would that person say? Like if I were to say, okay, this person's getting put on a performance plan, or they are being let go from their job, or things like that, what might they point to of someone that's gone through a similar situation? And they may say, well, and I'd say, okay, for example, if it's a sales employee, a little bit easier. I'd say if you're putting them on a plan or letting them go, how did they stack up against everybody else? And sometimes you look at it and you think, but they were the top performer last month, or maybe it's a different role that's a little harder to quantify. It's not as easy as stack ranking. You may look and see someone's performance review. And I said, well, 3 months ago, you gave them 5 out of 5. What happened? Well, they didn't really deserve that, but I didn't want to be mean at the time. I said, well, now you're going to look more than mean. That now it looks super unfair. Or they'll say, oh, well, they had good sales, but I handed them all of their accounts and I've been doing that for a year, and, we need them to get their own business. I say, okay, well, it's important context, because on paper, to me, it looks unfair. To them, it clearly, feels unfair because I'm not getting involved as a lawyer. And so some of it is to think, how would the other person paint it? And it's not always just negative. Sometimes it's thinking about, I have somebody on my team who's great. If I'm going to tell someone, who's someone you work with that's fantastic, whether it's a direct report or whether it's a client or just whether it's someone in your network that you rely on. And if I'm to say to those listening, think about somebody that really makes a difference in your life, then I may say on the flip of that, when's the last time you told them that, and told them what they do and the impact it has for you? And so the praise.
The good.
The
bad.
praise. The praise. No, the praise. And tell someone good, because often people get through, and sometimes you have leaders that are like, oh, come on, your paycheck is your thanks. Like, we don't all need these participation trophies. And no, you don't want to go through and tell, like, I read somewhere someone said, oh, every day this boss, says to every single person, you did a great job today. And it's amazing to each individual person. And I say, trust me, that is much better than the boss coming and saying you did a bad job today. But after a while, it feels like it's just routine. And so if someone actually really has a great day, is that boss doing something differently? Are they rewarding that? Are they recognizing that? Or is just this, that good intention can kind of quickly turn to lip service? Yep. But so I think something really important to do, and a challenge I have to those listening is I say that to you, think about somebody. Again, if you're a manager, somebody on your team, if it's a client you really appreciate and you really enjoy it, or it's just someone in your network that you've relied upon, reach out to that person and tell them what they do that you appreciate about them and the impact it's had on you. And I'll pause to consider that for many people, you hear this. And if you were to reach out to somebody and be like, oh, you mean so much to me because of XYZ, this is the impact, things like that, that person will be calling 911 for those in the U.S., the other emergency codes elsewhere, because they are going to assume that you and your whole family are kidnapped for ransom. And that's your code word, because that's not you. Someone's hacked you entirely. But, and so recognizing that, the shift is then, so say, I'm listening to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I'm listening to this podcast. And on it, they said to think about one person that's had such an impact. And you were the person I thought of in XYZ. And so that can undo all that awkwardness you may have about thinking and reaching out and saying something to somebody. It also gives context to that other person. It doesn't cheapen it to say, okay, well, you were given a prompt for this. That person instead, no, they hear it and they think, wait, all of these people and I'm the one you thought of. So I just think it matters. It matters so very much. So that's one challenge I have taken away from this podcast.
Love it. Love it. I do remember you triggered a thought about a CEO who went out with one of his vice presidents, and I was on a coaching call with the vice president. And he said, we were meeting with this client. It was a big $1 million client, whatever. And on the drive back, the CEO gave me a compliment. And I remember his response. He didn't tell me what the compliment was, I don't think. But he said, TJ, that compliment will last a year for me. It'll mean something a year from now to me. And I remember thinking about that, is thinking maybe a year separation of saying good things to someone is probably too long. But I do think if you're just walking in and saying everybody's great, whatever, then that can become trite. And so making sure that regularly I think it's valuable that you said is find the good things that people are doing and compliment it or recognize it and say thank you, I think goes a long way. So good. Meetings. Peter Drucker, in his book, The Effective Executive, shared 8 points. And one of those points was, quote, they run effective meetings. Talk about the power of running effective meetings and how important this is for managers and leaders to do this effectively.
One place to start is, before thinking about how effective meetings are, is to have them. And what I say is especially with one-on-one time with your team members. And what that looks like can vary. So as a leader, you may have 30-minute, 1-hour sit-downs with your team in an office, remote, virtually. You may just have a few minutes pre-post shift in a huddle if you're more on your feet or field or healthcare environment. But so a lot of people will say, I don't have one-on-ones with my team because they are a waste of time. But how that can play out is sometimes, you may say, okay, come find me if you need me. And that's the culture I have. People, it's an open door culture. And I say, okay, well, but what tends to happen is everybody's trying to open your door at the same time. And so whether if you're in person, you may see the knock, knock, the familiar knock, knock, quick question. No question is as quick as anyone ever thinks it's going to be. But all those people are coming at once, or you have Microsoft Teams and things are pinging. And so just nature of laws is, if you're not giving people predictable time, they'll come and find you and they're all going to need you at the same exact time. And everything feels super urgent. And then when you're not able to get to things urgently, people feel that's personal. Okay, well, you're not getting back to me, so they don't like me. They don't like my work. I'm getting fired. And you're on the flip side are thinking, oh, I'm so stressed out because everyone needs me. And so giving predictability, I say sometimes, I remember, and this sounds crazy, but Martha Stewart, when she went to prison, maybe something you didn't think I'd remember, she checked in early to go to prison. And I was asking my husband at the time, who now runs customer success for my business manager method. At the time, he was doing stock market reporting. And he said, well, it's about predictability, and the market wants predictability. And she's still, a figurehead of her business. And so for predictability, she's good. She's, checking in and doing that. And I just remember hearing about this idea of predictability, reliability. And as I think about it now in leadership, having that, it can provide so much. And it doesn't tend to take no budget. And from a time perspective, you often end up spending a lot less time if you do have structured. So, my team knows weekly we're going to have this one-on-one. They're going to have this time, and I'm going to show up on time. Because the other flip is sometimes you have the time. Future you thinks, I'm going to be available from 11 to 11:30 to my team. But what happens is at 11:23, your team member's been sitting there awkwardly in your office or on video chat, and you fly in. Sorry, I was with so-and-so, senior executive, all these things. But that tends to happen all the time. So your team members have a running joke that you're always going to be late. And so the signal that sends is to that team member, who is one of the people that are going to actually need to do the work that you need to meet and exceed your goals. They're coming in feeling frustrated, feeling like my boss doesn't care about me, I don't matter. And so they're not going to be able to perform their best work. That can really help if you can set time with them, show up on time. And in the book, I talk about some of the talking points to make sure you can preserve that time. And what do you say if you're meeting with a senior leader? Again, you got to have your gut. So sometimes you're not going to say anything at all, but I give talking points of what you can say if you find
get
yourself
in the book, and there's a
that.
bunch in here that talks about how to do these effective meetings. The only thing I would add, I don't recall if it's in your book or not, but it's just a thought as you were talking that came to me, is I do think that it is upper management leadership, whether it be the president, the CEO, someone at a higher level, they have to encourage it regularly, because down on the front lines, what I often hear is they'll say things like, well, we're supposed to do it, but we never do. And I usually see my guys on the dock or somewhere else, right, for 5 minutes, check in with them. But that's not a one-on-one. That's not an official one. That's not a pure one-on-one where someone feels like they're valued. And so I said, so it's one thing to have it grow from the grassroots, which a lot of times we're working with those people saying, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. But I'm going to tell you, leaders who expect it of their, like Ken Blanchard once said, all leadership is mirrored throughout the organization. So you shape the culture and the expectations. And if leaders will get behind this, it'll trickle down and be an expectation throughout the rest of the organization. So it's just a reminder to those upper management, upper leader, C-suite executives. Anyway.
I agree. And TJ, I'm curious if you've seen this, because especially as I started, moving away from legal HR, building business and working with organizations, I often do see exactly that. The senior leaders talking, this is important, and then they don't do it themselves. And but we expect everybody else. Or HR leaders will say, well, this is for our managers, our senior executives, they won't do this. They're too busy. And the more obvious pushback to that you've likely seen is, but if you don't do it, then it suggests it's not that important. And it's really hard for people to see. I mean, I've sat through leadership sessions, someone, as I was starting out, and I worked with a larger consulting firm, and I was facilitating part of it, and I saw it was a large healthcare organization, and all the C-suite leaders were there, fantastic, but they were sitting at the back of the room talking to each other, not paying attention at all, and I said to the consulting firm, I said, this is the biggest waste of money I've ever seen in time and energy. I was like, this is doing negative things, because all of these people, which are was like kind of director through the SVP level. So I'm like, all of these people can look. I'm like, you can hear them. I'm like, it's distracting to me. And they're like, yeah, but yeah. I know, but we don't want to say anything. I said, well, then you're not practicing what you preach. But so some conversations. But the flip side of that as well that I didn't appreciate till later is, as opposed to the message it sends if someone doesn't do something, when you do have senior leaders that are engaged, senior leaders that are having one-on-ones, or senior leaders going through a program, then you have someone that's like promoted into leadership. They're nervous. Oh, I'm getting this training. That's cool. They're likely telling a lot of people outside of your organization about it, their family, their friends. I'm doing this. I'm getting their training. Well, when they hear or see, like, oh, our CEO's gone through this, and they participated in this. The message they sent, they're like, oh, I'm doing this same training. My CEO did this. it instills not just a flip of, okay, they're walking the walk, but it is a sense of pride that leader, then they can see the path to how they want to be as they move up the ladder. And so
I have seen it. I've been in companies
you've seen all
where
of
they
those
basically
sides as
turn
well. But
40 managers over to me for 6 months and don't show up at all. And I'm always thinking, it'd really be good if the executives were in this training as well, so it can be mirrored from top to bottom, but they're and then you have some of these great leaders who will sit right at the table with everybody else or in the group and participate and not be overbearing. And I've even had some leaders say, listen, I'm in here, but I'm not in here to judge. I'm not in here to overspeak. I want everybody to feel free to share the things they want to share as we go through different discussions and so forth, because I'll prep the leaders beforehand. Hey, just don't dominate, because sometimes it'll shut everybody down being the leader in there. So I want you to be proactive and letting them know that's not what we want to happen in here. And then the leader's job is just to play along with everybody in that training, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that is such an important point.
Okay, next one. As we start winding down, I think this is a difficult one. In our leadership training, we find that one of the great bottlenecks of progress is servant. Okay.
Oh, now I'm excited.
I find
I like this
that
pause.
servant leadership is sometimes a problem. Now, I don't disagree with the spirit of servant leadership. Those are great leaders. What I see practically is someone who gives, doesn't delegate is where I'm going, right? And then becomes the bottleneck, because now these people believe, hey, anytime I run into an issue, instead of being self-initiative or whatever, or self-sufficient, right? I'll figure it out. They just put it at the feet of the manager or the leader. And then the manager is filled all day long with putting out fires, answering questions, and so forth, instead of teaching people to own their job. And you actually mentioned in the book, which I agree with, sometimes it's a healthy thing for a manager or a leader to go on vacation for a week or two, right? Because it allows people to have to make decisions on their own, and they become stronger because of it. Any thoughts around that related to delegation and so forth?
Yeah. It's something that where I see managers not delegating, it comes from a few things. Some is protecting my team. Okay, well, nobody can do it like I can, and so I don't want them to mess up. It's going to look bad on them. Also, often leaders think it's going to look bad on me. So nobody can do it like I can. I'll just do it myself. It's quicker. It's it's quicker, which you're probably right.
Sure.
If you keep doing it, it's going to be quicker. But when you add that up though over time, if you've taken some time to teach your team members, you end up saving yourself time and giving back to them. And then, I feel guilty. I feel really guilty. They're already so busy. And so some of it is just pausing to think, okay, what are they working on that's so busy? And does that matter so much? And your team members generally think that you are a wizard and an octopus. Right? And I explain this a little bit more in the book, but I say they think you're a wizard because they think you know everything they have going on. And so if you start asking questions and you don't give context, sometimes your team members will feel resentful. Because if you start to delegate, I listened to this podcast, unleash your greatness within. Because it's incredibly important for your health and your performance to take vacations. In the book, I give the example of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton. He actually wrote Hamilton he thought of the idea for Hamilton when he'd finally taken a vacation, because before Hamilton, his Broadway show he had was called In the Heights. And I think it was like 8 or 9 years. It was ongoing. And his wife was saying, you have to take a vacation. And he was saying, I can't, again, I'm so involved. I'm part of this production. It's got to succeed. He finally takes a vacation with his wife. He cracks open a book on that vacation, and it's a biography of Alexander Hamilton. And he starts thinking, and we know how that turned out. Now it's, I think, the most successful Broadway musical of all time, or up there. And so sometimes you will have real breakthroughs when you do it, but it is so vitally important to your performance and your health. No matter your job, no matter your experience, you have to step away. And if you don't, you are going to suffer. Your relationships will suffer, and your work will suffer, the thing you probably care about quite a lot. But so when you delegate, if you say, okay, I'm listening to this, I got to take a vacation. I'm going to take a vacation. So I'm going to give my team member this to take over while I'm on vacation. Well, if you just give that to your team member, again, they think you're a wizard. So they think, well, great, my boss is just trying to give me their work. And you're thinking, well, no, I'm trying to give you this opportunity and help my person grow and develop. That's not most people's first thought when they get an assignment. They think, oh, you're trying to give me this. And so it's really thinking about the purpose behind it, having the conversation, and then how to delegate, explaining what matters, giving them an opportunity to understand what matters, and also talk about a plan. I mean, one of the best questions that I see when people delegate successfully, if you give someone on Monday and then you say, okay, when does this need to be done? Because if you say, oh, this isn't a rush, but it needs to happen.
Vague, yeah.
Well, does that mean tomorrow? Does that mean next month? Give people a timeline. But then also, if it needs to be done by Friday, say, where do you think you should be on Wednesday, and what might get in the way of that happening? And so this starts to paint, again, has the conversation, takes more time than you just heads down doing it yourself. But these are the ways that your team member can anticipate challenges. And again, things still may pop up, but doing it successfully, it just involves a bit more of conversation and painting a picture of what could happen. Okay, this is what we'll do if that happens. And giving your team member a chance to talk through it can really make it transformational.
Love it. All right, let me ask you this. Are there any burning thoughts that you want to get out related to leadership or management that we haven't covered thus far, that maybe something you want to share?
But one that I like, that I really agree with you, and I was trying to find the exact name of this episode of the podcast, because I was going back and listening to a shorter episode you'd done a couple of years ago. But I want people to know, despite being a lawyer, when people would come to me, I would never judge what happened. Sometimes people did make a mistake. But generally, at the end of the day, I could always understand where they came from. I'll give a little asterisk to that of some people I don't understand what they were possibly thinking, and they should not have been in a position of leadership or anything. But generally, I can see where people are coming from. So I always try to come from a place of no judgment. And so you'd had an episode a couple of years ago that's about leaders stop beating yourself up, or stop being so hard on yourself. And so I love that message. And so go back and listen to that one, because that's going to be shorter than reading the book. But just to remind yourself of, no matter what happens, everybody's going to make mistakes. Your team's going to make mistakes. You are as well. And so give yourself the same grace. And as you're going then through the book and reading, okay, well, I didn't think about these things this way. I include language to say, if you realize that you need to change how you've been as a manager, or you feel like you need to make a shift, whether small, whether large, language to do that can do away again with all that awkwardness just in seconds, and help to build those relationships with your team, because that's going to be a really important part of making that change. But just knowing wherever you are, this book and everything I put out on social media is to really try to meet people where they are and understand you have a lot of challenges that are going to happen, and nothing can undo those. But when you have more simple frameworks, you can get through them a lot more efficiently.
And your book has a lot of those frameworks inside. You even have one whole chapter on, what's it called? Side by side, or sometime, let's see. Oh no, real life situations. And
yeah, that's, I think, the longest one. I read the audiobook. So if people get the audiobook, it's me reading it. And I got to that chapter, and I remember when I got the end of that chapter, I thought, well, that's a lot of situations.
Yeah, no, but that's good. That helps people. You break it down into different situations and so forth. So yeah. Encourage everybody to get this book to become a better manager, better leader. It applies to both. Let me ask this. How can people get your book?
So it's The Manager Method. You can always go to my website, managermethod.com/book. So I have all the links there. You can get it at your place of choice. And I also have resources there. So whether you're reading on your own, it'll include reflection questions to help you really bring it to life for yourself. There's some of those in the book, but you can find additional ones, managermethod.com/book, and also a book club guide. So let's say you're in a leadership group and you're looking for an easy resource. People can read the book chapter by chapter and go through these questions as well to really bring it to life and help make your leadership easier.
Perfect. Wow. Ashley, it was great to have you on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I think you do bring some valuable tools to the table. Good job on the book. And it's your first book, right? This is your baby. This will always be special to you. It just will be special. So
it will. It will. It's a labor of love. So going back to, I don't know whether you'd rather childbirth, fire, walking on fire, or writing a book and editing it a million times.
I don't know. You're probably a better
pretty
writer
close,
than me.
TJ,
I tell you, it's always a painful process writing a book. I won't compare it to giving birth. I have no idea. I cannot relate to that.
You know, this is TJ's a smart man. Everyone listening knows you're smart.
But we all have hard things we have to do. And I think going through those hard things with an attitude of hope, an attitude of looking for the good rather than the bad, there's a lot. Look, here's my one of my overall beliefs is you can find evidence to confirm any belief you have. There's enough evidence out. The question is it universally going to be a good thing long term? And so as we go through our peaks and valleys, just a reminder to everybody listening, hey, believe in yourself, believe in your goals, believe that you have the capability to be a better manager, a better leader with tools, just like Ashley Hurd has shared here in this podcast. And hey, I wish everybody the best. Thank you, Ashley, for being on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
Thank you, TJ. This has been awesome. Laughs, learning, all the things. So appreciate you.